Welcome everyone to week 5. For week 5, we're going to be looking at the macroeconomy, and we're going to be looking at some key concepts with aggregate demand and aggregate supply. It's going to help us focus on the role of the economy and how equilibrium is developed. So for this week, you're going to be reading chapters 27, 29, and 30. They're going to be looking at the role of macroeconomic relationships. We're going to be looking at the concept of aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and then you're going to be looking at the role of fiscal policy, deficits, and debt. For this week, you have 2 discussion forums, and you have an assessment. All of this work is due by Sunday as well. And on this left side here, you notice you have a lecture. The lecture is a wealth of information that you should review. And I don't like to cover it here because it's all information that you can cover on your own to help with many of the concepts. You have the iConnect lecture as well. So for the discussion this week, we're looking at going to the website. Sorry about that. Going to the website and focusing on the tables. And we're looking at the 4 components of aggregate demand, which are consumers, investment, government spending, net exports. And how do those components influence the recession that our economy experienced? Then you're going to be looking at the role of government spending. And if there's an increase in government spending, how will that influence an economy that's in a recession? And how will that influence aggregate demand? Those are many components that you want to focus on, because the government directly influences our economy and the level of spending. You also want to analyze why the economy could operate below its potential in the full employment. How could it operate below full employment? And how does the multiplier influence this? The multiplier is a very interesting concept. Let's assume that the government spends $10 billion. So if the government spends $10 billion, this could actually have an impact in our economy. And let's assume the multiplier is 4. So 10 billion times 4, it actually could influence our economy by $40 billion. And it's interesting to note that the multiplier really relates to a lot of decisions that are made. And we look at the multiplier and we try to understand how are decisions in our economy determined by the role of the multiplier. For the next discussion, we're going to be looking at fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is going to be looking at government spending and taxes, and how those 2 areas influence the economy. You'll notice that they can influence aggregate demand and aggregate supply with the use of taxes and or spending level changes. When we look at the different tools of fiscal policy, we're looking at stabilization and how these different tools influence our economy. And with fiscal policy, you want to focus on the role of timestamps. Fiscal policy takes a lot of time to implement sometimes, and that is a very important implication in our economy. So make sure to focus on that. The other thing you have here is the weekly assessment. So let's go over the assessment right here and what you might see on some of the questions. On question number 1, you're going to look at discretionary fiscal policy and what that refers to. Discretionary fiscal policy looks at the government changing taxes and spending levels to influence our economy. Taxes and spending levels, that's the key. Question 2 is looking at, suppose the economy is amidst of the recession. What would be a way to stimulate our economy? You would want to look at anything that increases consumer spending, so decrease in taxes or increase in government spending. Question 7 is looking at the role of the crowding out. And crowding out is very important. Crowding out is when the government spends money in a deficit and they don't have enough money. So what they do is they spend money and it causes interest rates to go higher. And this causes a lot of challenges in our economy with higher interest rates. So that's what that's focused on, higher interest rates, and when interest rates are higher, consumers do not spend any more money. Question 5 is looking at the determinants of aggregate supply. Aggregate supply is focused on wages, prices, expectations, and businesses. I'm sorry, business taxes, I should say. Those are the key components that they're concerned about. Question 5, if you want to avoid a recession, the government implements a tax rebate, cutting taxes for all households. You would assume that the consumers will spend that money. And given that consumers spend that money, that will directly influence the aggregate demand in our economy. Question 6 looks at an MPS of 0.4. Now there's two things you can do with a dollar. You can either spend it or consume it. So if the MPS is 0.4, that means the MPC would be 0.6. So the MPS of 0.4 means out of every dollar that a consumer gets, they save 40 cents of it. Question 7 is looking at dis savings. Dis savings is negative savings when you're actually spending more than you're making. Negative savings. Question 8 is looking at a graph and is wanting you to look at what is an example of a shift from aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 2. Question 9 is looking at the role of the multiplier. The multiplier is looking at government spending. So when the government spends more money, it multiplies through the economy. And that's what the multiplier is focused on. How does the role of the multiplier influence decisions that we have to make? Question 10 is looking at the Act of 2009 and looking at the stimulus that was provided. So look at the stimulus and how it helped consumers and businesses. Question 10 is looking at which of the following will have an influence on aggregate demand or aggregate supply. So interest rates change, that's going to be aggregate demand. Productivity is going to influence aggregate supply. Question 12 is looking at what do you think has more help for an economy? Do you think tax cuts could help an economy, revive an economy out of recession? And it should help an economy out of recession, but the challenges that we're facing is that some consumers have the ability to not spend money, and they could save money, which could not help the economy. And that's the implications that we're faced with that. So those are some of the things that we're looking at this week. We have 2 discussion boards and the assessment, and please let me know if you have any questions, but make sure to keep focusing in the discussion board. First post by Wednesday, 2 peer responses, and making sure that your post has an in-text citation and reference to support your work. But I look forward to your effort this week.